Hi, I'm Andy with San Juan Soil and Water Conservation District in northwest New Mexico. In this backyard conservation workshop video, we're going to be looking at irrigation systems, the drawbacks and the benefits of each one, and how water heavy usage they are for each type of irrigation system. In New Mexico, there's a lot of different types of irrigation systems you'll see used, and a lot of it has to depend on what type of water source you have. Now, there are some, going to be drawbacks and benefits to each one. And the reason we want to be aware of some of the drawbacks or the water usage of these irrigation systems is because here in northwest New Mexico, we're almost always in a drought. This is June of 2020, and we're once again going into an extreme drought. It's not that uncommon for us as we have been in a drought for almost 20 years now. So the first one is flood irrigation. Flood irrigation is one of the cheapest to start with or cheapest to install and set up, but it's also one of the most water heavy for usage. Benefits of flood irrigation is, it's cheap to set up, not a lot of hardware. You basically have your field leveled and sloped slightly so that the water floods out across your field and waters everything. Some drawbacks to flood irrigation. One is that you will need to have your farm or field laser leveled every couple years to make sure that the water floods properly. Otherwise, you'll have high spots and low spots where you get some parts watered more, some parts watered less. Also, this is a very water wasteful or water intensive type of irrigation. It's definitely not something you're going to want to do if you're on municipal water where you're paying per gallon. This is typically where you have water rights or ditch irrigation that you can use flood irrigation. The next type of irrigation is furrow irrigation. This is going to be a little bit less wasteful than open flood irrigation, but is still a little heavy on the amount of water that can evaporate. This is where you dig furrows or channels along the rows of your crops and then pump water into each of those channels. The water flows downhill and waters all of the crops along the channel. Now you're going to have less evaporation than you do in the open flood irrigation, but you're still going to have a lot of water open standing on the surface that can evaporate. Especially here in New Mexico where it's extremely dry and often windy, we lose a lot of water to surface evaporation. Now, another type of irrigation is sprinkler systems. This could be whether you're farming or you're watering a farm or field or your backyard or front yard. Irrigate or sprinkler systems are going to be less water intensive or less water loss due to evaporation than flood or furrow irrigation. However, to minimize the amount of water loss, you want to make sure to water early in the morning either before the sun comes up or just as the sun is coming up, or in the evening. However, if you water in the evening, you do want to water about half an hour to an hour before the sun goes down, or right around sundown, just to give those plants enough time to dry off before it gets dark. If your plants have water on them consistently in the evening at night, can cause a lot of mold or mildew problems or other diseases for plants. So you want to make sure they have time to dry out. Obviously you're wanting to water in the morning or evening when it's cooler, less windy, and less direct sun beating down on the surface where the water is landing, basically reducing evaporation. Now, next we have soaker hose irrigation or soaker irrigation. This here is going to be more water efficient than sprinklers because there's two ways to run these. You can run them right on the surface of the ground, or there are some soaker hoses that you actually put underground around your plants. Now, the soaker hoses are much more water efficient than any of the types of watering where water is on the surface of the earth, because if it's only depositing water directly around the base of the plant or it's depositing water underground, you don't have that surface standing water to evaporate from the sun beating on the surface or the wind and that kind of stuff. Also, you can minimize evaporation with soaker hoses by having mulch, which we'll talk about more in our mulching video. Now with the soaker irrigation, it is a little tricky, or can be tricky, to only get water where you need it. If you have lots of small plants and they're not in a row, you might not be able to get an equal amount of watering between them. So soaker irrigation is generally better for either larger plants where you can have a circle around the base of each plant, or if you have rows of crops, then you have a soaker hose in the middle and you have plants on either side of that soaker hose that then benefit from the water it's putting out. Another thing about soaker hoses to note is they do require pressurization. So these need to be hooked up to a pressurized system. If you are going to be using rain barrels or rainwater harvesting without a pump to pressurize the system, and you're just going to use gravity-fed watering systems, this will not be a good system for you. Also, if you're using ditch water or if you have water rights and your water is coming straight from the river or a ditch and it has a lot of sand or silt in it, and you're pumping that into your soaker hoses, those are quickly going to become clogged and not be very efficient. Soaker hoses are generally better on a filtered water system or a municipal water system, which is filtered. Now, for one of the most water efficient types of irrigation, we have drip irrigation. Now, unfortunately, one of the downsides of drip irrigation is the cost of not only setup but maintenance. It is a little spendy for all the little bits and pieces that go into a drip irrigation system. However, if you're looking to maximize your water efficiency and minimize the amount of evaporation you get, drip irrigation is going to be one of the best. They have little tubes that go to the base of each plant, and each plant can have an adjustment on the little nozzle of how much water it's getting. So you can specifically regulate how much water every plant is getting in your yard, which can be very efficient. Again, the downside is the setup cost and the setup time, and also the maintenance cost and time. This system is prone to clogging if you're not on a filtered water system. So again, this is going to be more for municipal water, basically water coming out of your home and your faucets or your hose spigot. If you're on irrigation water or dish water, this is not going to be a best idea for you, because that sand and silt in the water will be clogging up your lines and your little output nozzles. Now, of course, there is the hand watering method, and this is kind of middle of the ground for water efficiency. The biggest benefit of hand watering is that you're only putting water on the plants that need it, and you're hopefully giving them the amount of water they need. One of the most common mistakes with hand watering and with any type of watering is actually watering too much. We highly recommend getting a soil moisture gauge. They're not too expensive, but if you have a soil moisture gauge, you'll know exactly how much moisture your soil is retaining at certain depths, and it can tell you basically, or guide you on how much watering you should be doing. But of course, hand watering is an option, and some people just enjoy the time it also gets you to spend outdoors enjoying your garden, your plants and flowers and all that. Another downside to hand watering is that some plants don't like to have their leaves watered and actually like to have the water applied directly to the base or the roots, or they do better with that. So keep in mind which of your garden plants you should be watering only at the base and which ones can have the whole plant watered for better production. Another type of irrigation that you may not have heard before is Oya pots. Now, these have been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years, and this is a system of watering where you have a clay pot that is permeable. You dig a hole around in your garden. This is especially good for like raised beds or small garden beds, where you can have plots either interspersed, alternating sides, or you have one Oya pot in the middle of like a small circular garden. You then fill that Oya pot up with water, cover it, and it slowly leaches the water into the soil and ground around it, which is a quite efficient method of watering, but it's generally used on a much smaller scale. There are lots of different types of irrigation systems. Finding the right one for you will have a lot to do with where your water is coming from and whether it's filtered or not, or you have to deal with sand and silt. Whether you have access to an excess of water in what type of region you're living in. Here in New Mexico, we do not have an excess of water, so we have to be very careful with our resource. Also, how much you can afford putting into your system. If you're interested in learning about a low-pressure drip irrigation system that utilizes rain barrels, where you don't need a pressurized system like you do for the soaker hoses and drip irrigation systems shown in this video, check out our rainwater harvesting video, where I discuss a simple and pretty inexpensive system for a low-pressure drip irrigation system fed from rain barrels that can also be hooked up to municipal water when you don't have water in your rain barrels. Thank you for watching our Backyard Conservation Workshop video on irrigation systems. And as always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us through our website at sanjuanswcd.com. Thank you for watching, and we hope to hear from you.